Hi, everyone. So we'll be shifting gears a bit and looking at Americans' partisan perspectives on scientific consensus and authority. In case I forget to say later, thank you to the UAS team. We're very, very happy with these data. So a little bit of theoretical background. We are interested in dueling value commitments in the United States. There is a contemporary value commitment, one might argue under threat, of support for evidence-based policymaking, often in the name of the public good, and an older value in the United States, which is a enthusiasm for individual autonomy. We associate this with libertarian policy perspectives. So this duel between these two value commitments gets particularly problematic when it becomes wrapped up with the party system in the United States, as it has become lately. So we see this particularly during the COVID pandemic, when you have a Republican Party that is really resistant to various public health initiatives like vaccines or mask wearing, and a Democratic Party that's much more in favor. You can also see similar kinds of divides with respect to climate change. So there are ways in which we might understand this, and oftentimes how we explain what's going on is partisan in and of itself. So people from the left might say that Republicans are anti-science or just being selfish. People from the right might say, well, scientists are awfully biased themselves. Too left-leaning, or maybe sometimes the science is okay, but scientists are just awfully bossy, trying to order everybody around. So we are kind of coming out of this background. We are asking three questions. So first of all, we want to ask, beyond well-known cases, is there a consistent partisan divide over individual autonomy versus scientific authority? This is surprisingly not a particularly well-studied topic, at least thinking across many different issues. Second, can we characterize Democrats as consistently pro-science and Republicans as anti-science, thinking about things a little bit differently? So are Democrats more likely than Republicans to align their policy preference with what they believe to be scientific consensus? Are Republicans more likely essentially to say, I know what the consensus is, and I'm just going to go the other way anyway? So finally, we want to ask kind of more nuanced questions where we put these two things together. Is support for scientific authority in policymaking contingent on perceiving the scientists to be on your side, scientists to be aligned with your preference? So a little preview of what's to come. First, an answer to the first question, yes. We asked about 12 different issues on every single one. And this was our pretest to a future study. So there was no pretest to the pretest. On every single one, there's a partisan divide where Democrats are more likely to favor scientific authority and Republicans to favor autonomy. Second, this is more counterintuitive, are Democrats more pro-science and Republicans anti-science, at least in their own minds? And the answer is no. Actually, Democrats and Republicans both tend to think that scientific consensus supports their policy views. So the last question, is support for scientific authority contingent on believing that scientists essentially agree with you? And, you know, here we might expect that Republicans in particular are interested in autonomy because they think the scientists don't agree with them. And here you'll see the results are a bit muddy, but there's an on-average trend where people definitely do prefer to give scientists authority if they think scientists agree with them. However, it's much stronger for Democrats than for Republicans. Okay, so let me show you a little bit of the data. I have too much to show you, so I'm going to be going through some of this rather quickly, and happy to come back to any of it in the Q&A. So first of all, we fielded a study in last summer, and we had about 3,000 cases. And we asked, I mentioned, about 12 different topics. So 7 of those topics were worded in ways that were kind of Democratic or liberal leaning, and 5 of the topics were worded in ways that were Republican or conservative leaning. We did this basically to guard against acquiescence bias. So just to give you a little bit of flavor. So for example, for abortion, we're going to ask people, do you think that women should have access to abortion in the first 3 months? We'll also ask, do you think that abortion medication is safe? We'll also ask, do you think, to what extent should scientists have authority in deciding whether women should have access to abortion medication versus individuals, and some other categories that I'll show you. Okay, so the design of this study, there are 3 sets of policy questions, so 3 sets of 12 questions, policy position, where you think the scientific consensus is, and who should have authority. So there are other authority figures in society, of course, not just scientists and individuals. We also asked about elected officials and religious leaders. Turns out people are not too enthused about elected officials having authority, at least in the instances we asked about. So the individuals and scientists were much more popular. We also have lots of helpful controls and moderators, which I won't say much about, except we certainly asked about partisanship, and that's going to be very important in our results. Okay, so there's an example here just to show you kind of how this wording worked. To what extent do you personally agree or disagree that, generally speaking, adults should be encouraged to get an updated COVID vaccine? As far as you know, how much do scientists, doctors, or other relevant experts agree or disagree that, generally speaking, COVID vaccines safely decrease adults' risk of developing serious COVID? And finally, in your view, who should have the most authority or decision-making power regarding who is encouraged to get an updated COVID vaccine? Elected officials, scientists, et cetera, faith-based or religious communities, individuals, and families. So they were asked this 12 different times about the 12 different issues. Okay, so just our distributions, I won't dwell on this, except to show you, I think the most interesting result on the left is that scientists and individuals and families were the most popular category of authority. Happy to come back to this if anybody's interested. So with this table, we're essentially showing you on the left-hand side that in our study, Democrats behave like Democrats and Republicans behave like Republicans. And there's not too much of a difference there. On the right-hand side, we're telling you a little bit about scientific consensus. And this is our initial look at showing that Democrats and Republicans see science as their side. I'm going to show you some figures that make this much more clear. Okay. So this is our first figure to show you the relationship between believing, kind of where your assessment of scientific consensus is and what your attitudes are. We designed the questions so that a positive correlation means that you're bringing your attitude in alignment with where you think the consensus lies. You can see that these are all positive. It's pretty striking, all statistically significant. This is on average. We can also show you it by party. So Democrats and Republicans are both doing this. And you can kind of look at any individual issue. It's interesting to see some of the variation, but we don't have a great story as to why sometimes Democrats and Republicans differ. Sometimes they do, but the on average trend is that Republicans and Democrats are both doing this in approximately equal amounts. Okay, so I've just got 2 more data slides to show you, and this I think is going to land on time, so that's good. So here we're looking at what we see as our key outcome variable, which is, well, who should have authority in the policymaking arena? And the highlighted columns on the right are showing you that kind of, regardless of what I just showed you about what people think about scientific consensus, the positive numbers are showing you that Democrats across all issues are more likely than Republicans to say experts should be the ones having more authority than others. The negative numbers, except for in that very top cell, are telling you that across all of these issues, Republicans are saying that individuals are more likely than Democrats to say that individuals should be able to decide for themselves in these different arenas. So that's essentially, again, a libertarian policy perspective. So the last thing that I want to show you is we can look at this at the individual level. And what we're going to do is we are going to regress people's support for scientific authority onto a dummy variable, indicating simply whether a person believes that scientists are in alignment with their policy views. So are scientists on their side? That's essentially the dummy variable here. We would expect positive coefficients here, right? you're more likely to say scientists go for it if you think they agree with you. And we do see positive coefficients for the most part, not always statistically significant. But what is a little bit surprising and what is a little troubling for us, sometimes studies raise just as many questions as they answer, is that the trend is much more common for Democrats. So there's variation among Democrats, and they are more likely to support scientific authority if scientists agree with them. We don't see that trend as much among Republicans, suggesting that what I just showed you, Republicans not liking scientific authority, there's something else going on besides the fact that some of them think that scientists disagree with them. So that's the puzzle that's raised at the end of the study. So a little bit of a summary here. I'm out of time. But kind of the upshot here is that Democrats certainly are more pro-scientific authority than Republicans. However, if you take what they say seriously, Republicans don't perceive themselves as being anti-science per se, but they are most certainly resistant to scientific authority in society, if that makes sense. Okay, so